This is still going to be the Civil War study. And obviously, we're still in Lincoln and we're still in Lincoln primary sources. But I wanted to talk about how I'm organizing this study because doing something, well, in scholarship, how you do something is many times as valuable as what you're doing. And some things may sound obvious to you, but it may not be obvious to other people. So if there's anybody that is doing some research, perhaps this video will help. What I did was I went to the Library of Congress, and 15, 20 years ago, the Library of Congress digitized a lot of primary sources dealing with Abraham Lincoln's speeches, uh, addresses, communication, legislation, and put them all into a digital library. And even though I had copied these different sources as I was researching, I was primarily finding them in different places. And as I would see them cited, I would look up the document, pull the document, put it into a folder, and I had that folder labeled Lincoln Primary Sources. Now, if this didn't hit me, perhaps it hasn't hit somebody else. It never occurred to me to put the printed primary sources in chronological order physically in the folder that I had. And again, like I said, that may be obvious to most people, but for whatever reason, it just didn't strike me that way. And when I did that, I was able to see consistency with topics, frequency with topics. It's the difference to say Lincoln supported colonization heavily from 1858 to 1863. It's different to say approximately every 3 months there was some form of legislation or communication that Lincoln produced dealing with colonization. And when that information stopped, the primary sources in writing stopped, his activity began. So, in just making that adjustment into my organization of primary sources, I found Lincoln's planning period, his execution period, which actually links Lincoln consistently to colonization from 1856 when he joined the American Colonization Society all the way through to 1864 when the Haitian colonization attempt failed. And once that failed, and he had to, he needed the 13th Amendment. He had already tried colonization as the 13th Amendment, and it failed. And I believe his intention of going through with colonization through 1863 was to be able to represent it as the 13th Amendment. But when it failed so badly in Haiti, he knew he had to come up with a different idea. And that was when he changed slavery. He transformed slavery from chattel slavery to penal slavery. And that's in the 13th Amendment where it says you can't have slavery unless it's punishable by a crime. Penalty, penal slavery. And he transferred slavery from the private sector to the public sector, from the businessman to the judiciary. He couldn't control the Southern businessman, but the federal government had a greater control over the courts. Because even if the state courts had particular rulings that were problematic, the Supreme Court generally controls all laws and interpretations of the Constitution. So it would ultimately be controlled by the judiciary. Now, there are a couple of things that's problematic, and just in the interest of being clear, everybody is not seeing all the videos. So I want to make sure I clarify colonization. Colonization is the mid 19th century, well, 18th century, no, full 19th century white person's scheme of removing Negroes from the country. Now, that is what colonization is. Just, we've built the country, we don't need them, remove them, get rid of them. We don't want to live near them in the north, and it's problematic economically for slavery affecting wage labor in the North, where they were trying to build a white middle class to reduce taxes of the rich in the North. So black people were a problem, and their answer was just to get rid of them. We brought them here, let's send them back out. That's what colonization is. And when you hear someone say that black people were split or partially supported colonization, that is an incorrect statement. That is an undereducated statement. Black people, by and large, did not support colonization. Overwhelmingly did not support colonization. That was why the American Colonization Society was established in 1816, but they couldn't even get anyone to go until the 1820s. And maybe only 19,000 out of 4 million people really participated in this. So this was not something black people went to. And there's a difference between black migration, because there were black people doing repatriation. But when I choose where I go, that's migration, just like a white person. White people use different terms for different people. When they do something, it's called one thing. When we do something, it's called something else. If black people are saying, we want to leave, even if they appeal for funding from a colonization group, that's still migration. It's just like the difference between emancipation and manumission. Emancipation is when the state, when the government releases someone from a labor contract or slavery. That is emancipation. Manumission is when a private citizen does it. So those aren't the same thing, just like colonization and migration is not the same thing. Or immigration with an E. That is traditionally associated with black folks moving. But for someone to say colonization and migration are the same thing when it comes to black folks, it's not. And why is it called colonization? In every colony in the Western Hemisphere, there were particular elements that were present for a settlement to be a colony. Haiti was a settlement, was a colony of France. They had an economic connection, they had an ethnic connection, they had a cultural connection, they had a military connection. They had a governing connection. They were citizens of France, as we were with Great Britain, which is why when Bacon's Rebellion happened, it was the British military that came. When the Haitian Revolution happened, it was Napoleon Bonaparte that came. What Lincoln and the American Colonization Society was doing was not colonization. They were sending black people to become citizens somewhere else. There was no there was no economic infrastructure built for those people, nor was it an economic benefit coming back to the United States. That was a removal. So it's as big of a question as to why historians in the 21st century are still using the term colonization to describe the removal of black people. Now, it wasn't just black people being removed. You had the removal of Native Americans at the same time. Now, it was previous to that, obviously, but in the mid 19th century, these roads crossed. And I also submit that there was, now the Native American removal was actually the Indian Removal Act. So when they removed natives, they called it an act. But then they removed in the mid 19th century as well. They removed Mexicans, the Mexican American War, when they took the rest of the continent, Texas all the way to California up to Idaho. That was a removal of Mexican people. Now you're going to have people try to split hairs or engage in semantics by saying, well, all the land that Mexico sold wasn't Mexico's land, it was some Native American land. But the point was they were removing Mexican people, they were removing Native people, and they were removing black people. That is what's going on today. There's a reason why we went from 30% of the nation to 12. That's why they had the green migration. That's why it's easier for Canadians to come in this country than Nigerians. That's called whitening. If you don't believe that this country does whitening, ask an Italian their history, ask a Jew their history, ask an Irishman their history. It was until the 1940s. I was born in the 1970s. So we're talking very close in time. We're not talking back in the days before electricity. We're talking there were people walking around when this occurred. Irish, Jews, Italians were not considered white. But when the country wanted to broaden their whiteness, they then pulled those groups in and gave those groups an economic floor. The Italians got civil service jobs, particularly the fire departments. The Irish got policing jobs. And your Jewish people received the political and there was political, but it was definitely a branch of government. I'm gonna have to look that up. I know it was civil service, but I'm trying to remember exactly which one. But each one of those were absorbed in, and if you watch old movies, most of the police will have an Irish accent. Same thing with the fire department. So you'll see where whitening has been a very old part of the Western Hemisphere because it happened 100 years in South America before it happened in the North. And a lot of that had to do with the Haitian Revolution, because one of the reasons why the Haitian Revolution was successful was because so many people of African descent outnumbered the Europeans on that island. And that's when they began to keep a count and keep a tally of getting overpowered. So, how you organize your information can bring out and bring about new findings, just the order of it. So it's not just what you're reading or how you're reading it or if you're reading it, but it's the order in which you place it where things will become more evident. So don't just get caught in, there's so many things, there's levels to this. First, you got to know the information, but then you'll find out how you catalog the information will assist in how you present the information and help you find new ideas within the information itself. I am trying to remember a comment that was made to me that it was a seasoned historian who made the comment, but I wanted to make that a part of this video, but I'm kind of losing it. So we will come back to, I believe, I'm going to touch on the next video will be the two confiscation acts. These were confiscation acts were legislation that Lincoln put out during the Civil War, when the Civil War first started, and then he came back and made a second one. And we'll talk about the difference between the first Confiscation Act and the second Confiscation Act. And it also obviously deals with what? Colonization. Every time Lincoln could get an opportunity between 1861 and 1862, it's all through 1862. In each piece of legislation, he's putting in America's ability to ship black folks out. And I just remembered, I'm old. I just remember what that professor had said. Now, this person is not a Lincoln historian, so I don't hold it against him. I think I was more offended by how offensively he worded his statement as opposed to the fact that he didn't know. When colonization was going on, they did not want to do another forced migration where they just round black folks up and ship them out. Now, that could be for a lot of reasons, but to be honest with you, it's not in the primary sources. So any connection of that would be conjecture. That would be a historic jump. It may be a qualified jump, but it would be a jump just the same. What is not a jump is the propaganda that was used to try to convince black folks to do it, which all of these things I'm saying reduces volunteerism, flat out misrepresentation, political pressure. If I am in charge of your well-being, I'm the president. It is at least debatable if you are a citizen of this country. And at least Lincoln was presenting this to them as though they were citizens of the country, because he did say he felt that the Declaration of Independence saying all men are created equal, he felt that that did include black folks. He just did not feel black folks were as equal as white people, but he felt on a particular level, everybody was equal. In fact, he articulated this. He said in his debate with Stephen A. Douglas, when it comes to a man working and receiving the bread for his work, that's equal to everybody. But access to wealth, intelligence, that kind of stuff, no, white people are superior to black people in that way. But when it comes to this ground level, It's a book by Skip Gates that talks about how Lincoln could put things in silos as to where he will have egalitarian views here, but very racist views here. And he could function, he could bounce in between the two. The two never interrupted each other. So the volunteer aspect was still coerced. And if it's coerced, is it freedom? Because if I tell you I will free you, but your freedom is contingent with you leaving this country and going where I said you should go. Well, that's not volunteering, number one. And that's freedom. That's actually in American law, which Lincoln was a lawyer, that's duress. I'm going to tell you that if you don't do something, if you don't sign this, if you don't volunteer to do this, you will have a life of torture, murder, and ownership. But if you sign this willingly, you're good. And that's how America established Liberia, was by gunpoint. That's how they executed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, ending the removal of Mexican Americans from Texas to the ocean under duress. If something is done at gunpoint, that is not a treaty. If you're being forced by gunpoint to walk 500 miles, that's not an agreed upon act. So we have to watch how we evaluate our information and also how we store and organize our information.